This scene is pretty scary, even if you're an adult. So I can only imagine the amount of terror it might evoke from the young children this film is primarily targeted at. But is that really a bad thing? You see, all too often, children's media winds up coming across as condescending to the people who are meant to consume it. But kids are more intelligent and more resilient than we often give them credit for. And a movie like Puss in Boots: The Last Wish really seems to understand that. So today, let's take a look at what is easily one of the best kids movies to come out in quite some time, and why more movies should actively try to terrify children.
I just love the smell of fear.
Now, to be clear, this isn't some boomer video about kids are too sheltered, getting tetanus builds character. This is a video about the power of good stories. So before we analyze Puss in Boots, let's talk briefly about why scary children's media is so important. Fun fact about me, I grew up watching VHS tapes religiously as a kid, but it was quote-unquote children's movies from the 80s and 90s that really stuck with me. And by stuck with me, I of course mean gave me nightmares well into middle school. The twisted yet tangible aesthetic of the puppets and animatronics, combined with plots that focused on terrible things happening to people around my age, meant that films like Dark Crystal, Neverending Story, and even Hocus Pocus were the reason I single-handedly kept the nightlight industry afloat. However, despite just how scared I was of films like these, I also couldn't keep myself from watching them. And I think a lot of this has to do with movies being a safe way to interact with the things that scare us. Watching young people be put in situations that I actively was afraid of, being kidnapped, fighting monsters, seeing David Bowie in leather, but ultimately come out alright in the end, helped give me courage to overcome the things that frighten me in real life. And this is why I believe it's so important not to shy away from scary topics in film and television aimed at kids. Studios like Disney and Pixar have started to tackle heavier topics like Hispanic family trauma, white family trauma, Asian family trauma, and for some reason, Woody having a midlife crisis? But they largely avoid frightening their audience in an attempt not to alienate them. Puss in Boots, however, actively sets out to be scary for significant portions of the runtime, which leads to a highly rewarding film for children to sit through. You see, The Last Wish is a story largely focused on overcoming fear in all its many forms. So let's dive into the movie and see what both children and adults can learn from this narrative. The first and most obvious fear that is addressed in this film is the fear of death. On the very last of his 9 lives, Puss is forced to reckon with his own mortality, doubly so once death himself arrives to collect his soul early. But aside from the inherent spookiness of, well, this, there's more to this fear than just self-preservation. While he doesn't want to admit it, Puss feels unsatisfied with the lives he has led up until this point. Sure, he's gone on all sorts of adventures, gaining infamy and adoration in equal measure, but it's all pointless if he has no one to share it with. While the legend and persona of Puss in Boots is known by countless people around the world, our hero has pushed away everyone that has really gotten to know him. Therefore, his fear of mortality comes from the fact that death would conclude Mr. Pibb's story, and he is fundamentally unsatisfied with that ending. This is why so much of the story focuses on Puss building meaningful relationships with Kitty Softpaws and Perrito, with the most pivotal piece of dialogue in the movie being,
"I've only ever had one life, but sharing it with you and Kitty has made it pretty special. Maybe one life is enough."
These interpersonal relationships give his life meaning and purpose in equal measure, which is why he is unafraid when death finally catches up with him. Even the short time spent with his unconventional family has made it so that Puss can finally say that he's truly lived a good life. If his story ends here, then it truly will be a tale worth telling. He has finally come to appreciate that life is not an infinite adventure, but rather a finite experience made up of individual moments and memories. In truly valuing each moment as you experience it, you begin to live your life in a way that ensures that these moments of meaning will be plentiful. Now, while realizing this allows Puss in Boots to overcome the fear of his own mortality, there is another fear still deeply rooted in the fabric of his character. I'm of course talking about the fear of abandonment. Like I mentioned before, the notorious PIB has pushed away anyone that has gotten close to him. But why is that? See, allowing yourself to be known by another person, and I mean truly understood, is a deeply vulnerable position to put yourself in. If they get to know the real you, but choose to leave anyway, it's easy to internalize that as a sign that you're not worthy of a connection with other people. As a result, Puss doesn't give other people the opportunity to reject him. He lives a nomadic life, never staying in one place long enough to form meaningful attachments. He plays into his status as a legend because that is a persona he is able to control. He has designed it to be loved by everyone, and if anyone dislikes the infamous Puss in Boots, that's fine. It's not really who he is anyways. But as liberating as that lifestyle can be, it's also incredibly lonely. Ironically, Puss is far from being alone in his fear of abandonment. His partner in crime, Kitty Softpaws, is equally terrified of being let down by others. She doesn't let herself trust anyone because she knows that might give them the opportunity to hurt her. As a result, Kitty and Pib find themselves in an emotional stalemate for much of the film, refusing to trust each other and ultimately making their mission far more difficult than if they simply gave each other the benefit of the doubt. This same phenomenon is also what led to their previous relationship ending. After having a panic attack, Puss explains that the reason Kitty resents him is because
Santa Coloma wasn't a heist, Perrito. It was a church with a priest. And Kitty, everything but me.
Oh, you left her at the altar?
On top of this, Kitty reveals soon after that
It's okay.
I didn't show up either.
Wait, what?
they are both afraid that the other person will abandon them, and so they both take action preemptively in order to avoid heartbreak. But if they both just had the courage to trust one another in that moment, they could have started happy lives together right then and there. And this is where Perrito really shines as a character, standing in stark contrast to the other 2/3 of the main trio.
I don't believe you.
That's okay, as long as you believe in yourself. What?
Perrito is a character that is trusting to a fault. Now, you could label his willingness to trust others in the face of repeated mistreatment as naivete, but I choose to see it as a form of courage. Life hasn't been kind to our furry little friend.
And they put me in a sock with a rock in it and then throw me in a river?
But despite all that, he doesn't let this misfortune affect his outlook on life. And I think this is why. Regardless of not being the brightest character we meet, Perrito possesses the emotional wisdom to know that the only way for good people to enter your life is for you to be willing to let them in. Yes, this does mean you are vulnerable, and Perrito is proof that you will most likely be hurt more than once. But having the courage to reject cynicism and trust others is a necessity if you want to find those that will do the same for you. A great example of this is how the three bears react to finding out about the true nature of Goldilocks' wish.
I'm getting a family! That's what, a proper family! Then everything will be just right!
You're just right. He's getting rid of us.
This is a major betrayal of their trust. It's well within their rights to turn around and leave, but instead of doing that, Mama Bear simply responds,
I was always afraid it was too good to last. And whether you think we're your family or not, if this is something that will make you happy, we'll get you that wish. Come on, boys.
This pure and selfless act of kindness is so powerful because it is made in the face of rejection. It is a mother saying to her child, You have the power to hurt me and the ability to cut me out of your life, but nothing you can do will change the fact that I love you. Although it takes some time, the power of this statement eventually dawns on Goldie, and she realizes she already has a family, and they're as real as any she could ever wish for. Likewise, Perrito's unwavering loyalty and selflessness makes Puss realize that there are people who won't reject him. In fact, they prefer the real him over any persona he could create. And this is why Death gives up his chase, ultimately saying,
I came here for an arrogant little legend who thought he was immortal. But I don't see him anymore.
Finally overcoming his fear of abandonment, Puss is able to let the legend die so that the man behind it might truly live. And live well he does. He's no longer alone, but instead surrounded by family, finally able to say that
Everything is just right.
Thanks for watching. Click here for more analysis of film and television. I'm Dylan, and this has been The Writer's Block.